Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I've got a great tutorial lined up for you today that helps fix one of my biggest pet peeves in photographs, and that is a really crooked horizon. Kind of like the one you're seeing on camera right now. We gotta fix that. That is just unacceptable, and it's really not that hard. This trick in Photoshop doesn't take much longer than that did right there, and it makes good images become great images. So let's head on into the studio and get started. Alright, welcome to the studio everyone. Before we get started, I want to cover something real quick. I'm doing all of my editing on a PC. I don't have Mac money, so I don't know the commands and quick keys for Mac the way I do for a PC. So hopefully you can follow along with me. Most of these are pretty basic commands, they're nothing fancy. If I happen to use a quick key, I'll make sure I let you know what the actual function is. But I am doing all of this on a PC, so I hope you can follow along with a Mac. So let's get started. Okay, so here is my image that we're going to work with this evening. This is an image from my 2016 trip to the Outer Banks, just before Frisco Pier was torn down. This was from one of the sunsets that evening, and as you can see here, the horizon is not quite straight. There are multiple ways you can correct this horizon problem. Photoshop can do it, Lightroom can do it. I prefer to not do it in Lightroom because the rotation tool only works at full view. It does not work at a zoomed in view where you can zoom in and get really accurate with it. So I don't use it in Lightroom. But what I do is I get all of my edits done, everything I'm going to do to my image before I export it. And one of the things that I make sure I've enabled is profile corrections. As you can see, it takes out a little bit of that barrel distortion that's created by this lens. This is the Zeiss Batis 2.8 18mm lens, and it has a little bit of mild barrel distortion here in the middle. That's important because if you don't enable that, even if you get your left and right side of the horizon straight, you might have a dip or a bow in the middle, up or down, depending on how your camera was tilted. So we always want to make sure that that is enabled, because that will give us the best chance of getting a nice straight flat horizon once we're in Photoshop. So I've got all of my edits done. I'm ready to export it to Photoshop. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And through the power of editing with video, I will speed this up a little bit, make it a little faster. So now once we're here in Photoshop, want to make sure that our rulers are visible, and the standard key for that in Windows is Control-R. That lets you bring guides down from the left and the top. So I'm going to bring a horizontal guide down just to my horizon line, just to illustrate that it is in fact quite a bit out of level. The light was changing pretty quickly on this trip, and I was chasing that light and working in the sand and working with the waves, so I didn't always have time to use the in-camera level to try to get it as straight as possible. And one of the things about in-camera levels is they are accurate to a point, but they are not incredibly accurate. They are accurate to within, a half a degree or so, if you have the time to set it up. In this case, I was moving too fast and trying to dodge these incoming waves to not get too soaking wet. So, anyway, I've got a horizon that isn't quite straight, and I want it to be straight. So the first thing I do is I use that horizontal guideline that I've already brought in, and I bring another one in from the left and let it cross the horizon somewhere where that horizontal guideline does. And then I will come back over here to the right side of my image and bring a horizontal guideline down, zooming in on it, and then bringing another vertical in from that same point. Going back to full screen, we're going to use the ruler tool, which in Windows is quick key is I. That brings out the ruler tool. And if you have it set up so that you snap to guides, it will automatically snap to that intersection of those two guides. And you drag that ruler tool across from one intersection to the other, and then go to Image, Rotation, Arbitrary, and you can see that it is 0.97 degrees out of rotation. What it does is it is trying to figure out what perfect zero would be based on that ruler. Hit OK, and it rotates the image for you. And then you can zoom in and see that that horizontal line now covers left to right, and it is right on that horizon, just like we want it to be. This also shows why it's important to try to get that as close as you can in the field, because as you can see, I've lost information on all four sides of my image. I'm throwing away resolution that I paid for buying a higher megapixel camera. So one more reason to try to make sure you get it right in the field, so that you don't have to throw that stuff away. But after you've got it rotated, drag your guides around and do your crop to the size that you want it. In my case, I wanted to keep this at a 2:3 ratio. And I was more worried about not losing too much on the right side. So that is my final crop. I will do that before I do any more edits in Photoshop. That's the first step I do once I go from Lightroom to Photoshop, because I don't want to be looking at what all of these things on the outside were going to be if they're not going to make a difference in the final image. And speaking of that final image, after all of my edits were done, this was what the final image looked like. In the field, it didn't look that flat. It looked more like that. But that's something we're going to cover in probably a video coming up very soon about my editing workflow. But for tonight, it's just about this image that went from having a crooked, distracting horizon line to a nice, clean, straight horizon line. And now I can go about the rest of my editing. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, hit that like button. Leave me a comment. If you want to see something that on the channel coming up in the future, let me know. I'll be glad to dig into it. See you next time. Thanks.